Good morning. So for the last 4 weeks, I've been teaching math at a Lakeview Junior High, which is actually where I went to school. So I've been getting much more comfortable speaking in front of people now. So still a little nervous right now, but it's better. So it's good to be here with you all today. We may be small in numbers, but we are strong in spirit. So I'd like to start this morning by introducing the scripture, as Amy did a little bit, and briefly talking about what occurred with Jesus and his disciples. So in Matthew chapter 1, we read that Jesus took Peter, James, and John up to the top of the mountain by themselves. I think this was Jesus drawing them away from the hectic hustle and bustle of the cities. He's taking some people that are very special to him to a place that is very special to him. There it was that he was transformed in front of them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. It is here that Peter then speaks to Jesus and wishes to make 3 dwellings for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Suddenly a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice said, "This is my son. With him I am pleased. Listen to him." The disciples were terrified, and they knelt down at Jesus' feet, as I'm sure all of us would be when you hear a booming voice, or however they heard it. Jesus then reassures them not to be afraid, and they all go down the mountain together. The voice that told the men to listen to Jesus, even though they did not understand everything that was going on at the time, they needed to have faith and to trust in him. I think too often we let our fear dictate our decisions. We are blind and we don't allow our trust in God and others to have the impact that it should on our lives. I think we are faced with difficult decisions, whether we can identify them at the time or not, and we let our fear of the uncomfortable make our decisions for us. So I would like to show a video of a small boy who does not allow fear of differences or ignorance to dictate his decisions. Whether he was aware of it or not, I think he was listening to Jesus.
I pick up a broken comb, run it through my thin gray hair. Though I don't have any plans tonight, I'm not going anywhere. Well, I should have seen this coming. Don't know why I'm surprised.
When the best of us steps up, our nation stands a little taller. We all play for Canada.
Little Canadian subliminal messaging. What a powerful message. I would like to now open up time to give you all a chance to share some of your experiences and stories. Some of you, maybe you have had a mountaintop experience that has greatly affected your life. Maybe times you felt afraid and reached out for help or support from people. Or maybe a time when someone helped remind you how to listen, or served as God's voice. So to open up, I will start myself, and then Amy has a mic that you're welcome to share with. So I'd like to share a story. The first one, kind of a mountaintop experience for me. It was not on a mountain, but kind of an experience that changed my perspective on things. When I was student teaching in Mumbai, India, I was only there for about 2 months. But during the weekends, I liked to take that time to travel around the city as much as I could. And I was about 45 minutes away from the downtown of the city. And so there were trains, kind of subway trains that were above ground that you would take to get to these, to get to downtown or get to other places. So I've been on trains before. I've been on subways in New York, and I've been on some other subways, and they're, not the cleanest of places, but they get the job done. But these trips on the train were, I didn't know, unlike anything I could have expected. So you come up to you get on the station, the platform where the trains come up, and as the train approaches, the first thing I notice is none of the doors are closed. All of the doors were wide open, and as it was slowing down, people would jump off early, just kind of, get ahead, they didn't want to be waiting. And, as it stopped, then we would get on, a bunch of people, would get off. It was very, lots of people on there, so standing room only. There were things, to hang on to, but then it gets going again, and the doors didn't close. So again, as it's taken off, you see people kind of running up next to it and jumping in, hoping that they can time it right. And so that in itself was pretty eye-opening. So as we were going down the railway, I tried to position myself close to the door because I didn't like to be kind of confined, surrounded by people, because it was very hot there. So even I felt like I could hold on, I trusted myself enough to hold on and not, fall out. And when I would look around and see the different tracks and look at, the tracks that the trains would go on, you would see just for miles and miles and miles, homes of people that lived inside the track area. So they had positioned the home just enough so that when trains would go by, they would not be hit by those, but they were any other space that was on the side, they were using that to live. And I would also see, I would see crops. I would see people had set up little crop squares where they were growing their food, I think, or maybe food to sell. I don't know exactly. And that was just such such a humbling moment for me. I think the way I looked at it, it's such an effective use of space, right? We have that space here, and for safety reasons, we're not going to let people live next to the trains. But they didn't have those rules, and so the people took advantage of it. And did they want to live by the train? Probably not. But when you're given, you're given lemons, you make lemonade. So I think I had the choice to view it as how privileged I am, with the things I've been blessed with. But I'm very envious of how they are able to use their situation for the best. I don't think I'd be able to do some things that they can figure out. So.
For those of you who have heard this testimony, bear with me, but I feel like it's a good time to share part of my testimony about the time when my first husband died. I know some of you haven't heard a whole lot about that. Please bear with me because I still get emotional about it. But I wanted to share with you at a very difficult time in the lives of the kids and myself and my mom and dad, and my whole family. And so anyway, Jeff and I were 29 years old. Our kids were 2, 4, and 6, and life was good. Jeff's career was going well. We were in the middle of building a new home and had sold our home. And Jeff, we lived in Cincinnati, and the Cincinnati Greater Airport is actually over in northern Kentucky. So it's about, depending on traffic and so forth, it's 40-minute drive or so. And on a Monday morning, Jeff went to the airport because he was flying to Tennessee on business. And a little while later, the hospital called and wanted to make sure that they had the right person, and said that you need to come to the hospital right away. And so I wanted to know, they said it was, my husband was there, and so I wanted more information. And they wouldn't tell me anything other than to come as quickly as you can. So having a little bit of medical background, I knew that this was not a good sign. So I'd been waiting for a friend to come pick me up. We were going to go play racquetball, and I waited and waited. It seemed like a long time, but in reality it was probably just a short time. So because I thought, well, I'll have her go with me. So I couldn't wait any longer, so I jumped in the car and took off. I took Kim next door to our neighbors to babysit, and the other two were David was in school and Carrie was in preschool at the time. So as I was getting on to the freeway, I thought, well, I'm just going to turn the radio on, and maybe they'll say something about an automobile accident. I figured that's probably what had happened. And as I was on the ramp getting onto the freeway, they came on and told about an airplane crash that had just occurred at the airport. They said it was a small craft and that there were no survivors. And so I knew then and there that this is what was happening. And of course I lost it. So I just pulled over on the ramp and said, God, you got to help me. And there was an older couple that was getting on the freeway right behind me, and they pulled over. I think they were. They might have not have been. But anyway, an older couple stopped right away, came up to the door and wanted to know what was going on. And I think I told them, probably as best I could. And so one of them took my car and parked it over in a parking lot, and they drove me to the hospital and stayed until we all left the hospital later. Before I left the house, I called my mom and dad because they lived over in northern Kentucky, and I said, told them what had gone on. So they were at the hospital before I got there, and so they were there to meet me, and they told us right away what the situation was, and that couple stayed with us the whole time. So I praise God that couple listened to what I believe was the voice of God. It could have been anyone, or it could have been no one that's, stopped for a long time. But they were so kind and gracious and so caring. And at the time, our pastor, we were attending the Cincinnati congregation, our pastor was Gordon Cease, and he and his wife, Dolores, were actually on vacation driving, I think it was Missouri or Kansas, out through there. And they heard this telecast on the radio. Now, how often do small planes go down somewhere in the U.S., and do we hear about it on the local news? No. So, and he said they had just turned the radio on when they heard the broadcast, and they, at that time, gave Jeff's name, so they knew what was going on. And they turned around and came home, and they were at my house that evening, and really stayed with us as much and as long as we needed them to. And Gordon prayed for me that last night, or that evening, prayed for all of us, of course. And parts of his prayer were so, well, it was all so powerful, but I remember real clearly one of the things he prayed for was that I wouldn't be bitter, because I think he understood how that could affect a lot of people's lives. And by the grace of God, I've never really struggled with bitterness, and that's been a real blessing. But I thank him that Gordon and Dee listened to the voice of the radio that day. Not that we wanted them to hear that, but they were really listening to the voice of God and responded. And I found myself in the midst of a lot of legal stuff due to the circumstances. We didn't have lawyers. We didn't know anything about lawyers. We were 29 years old, life was good. But Gordon, because of the business he was in, he was affiliated with a law firm in Cincinnati, and it turned out to be a good situation for us, and they were just so helpful. And I could go on, but I wanted to give other people the opportunity to share this morning, and maybe another time we'll share some more. But God is good, and he blesses us and never leaves us.
Thank you.
I'll try to stand up. That's all right. Well, wow. Yeah, I don't think I need this. As most of you know, I've lost 3 sisters in like 3.5 years. And a couple of them I was pretty close to. And every time I seem to go to the memorial or the service, I end up trying to be the peacemaker, because there's, over the years, been a lot of things in our family where people don't get along very well. I don't know if that happens to anybody else. But make a long story short, this trip was a good trip. The service was unbelievable, considering I grew up as a kid, 5 years old, walking to this church. And pretty much fire and brimstone type church. But just a message of love by the pastor, did an amazing job. And I felt like for the first time in my life, I could just sit back and let God take care of it and not me. And I found out how relieved I was to just sit back and let him take care of it. It was, for my family, it was exceptional. Because, but it was really good to see folks get along and love each other. And remember my sister in a way that was more about who she was and not about the things she may or may not have done. So I just, first of all, want to thank you guys for your prayers. I want to praise God for being there and bringing peace to our family. Thanks.
Thank you.
Many, many years ago, I lived in upstate New York in a little town called Rome for about 2 years. And I was going through some struggles, internal struggles. And I remember one evening, I had this dream. I really didn't understand it. I just knew that I had the presence of mind that something needed to change. I needed help. And I'd always been really close to my dad and my mom, but especially my dad. He just was very easy to talk to and always seemed to have words of wisdom when you needed them. And in this dream, there was a knock at my door. And I went to the door, and it was my dad. And he said, "I felt that you needed me, and I'm here." And that was it. That was my dream. So the next day, I said, you know what? I feel the need to call him and ask him to pray for me. I think the Lord's leading me to do that. So I called and told him that I had been struggling with something internally and that I really had been praying that somehow I'd receive some help and that I'd had this dream. And he said, "That's weird." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I had a dream last night that someone knocked at my door, and when I opened it, it was you." And you said you needed me. And you came in, and he said, "I put my arms around you, and I told you how much I loved you, and that I prayed for you." He said, "So I was going to call you today." He said, "But you called me first." And I felt that the Lord had heard my prayer. And in those dreams between my father and I, it was the Lord reaching down to this plane and letting us know that he was aware of our needs. And because I had sought in prayer help, he knew that he could give my father the same dream, and that we could connect and get that help that we needed for each other. And it was a blessing to me. I don't know if internally I was listening and didn't know I was listening to the Lord, to the Spirit, or maybe my father had been praying about me, who knows. But it happened, and it was real. And it took me back. I mean, I was like, wow, this was like a miracle to me. And I thank the Lord every day for experiences like that help me to know that he's always there. We just need to reach out.
Thank you.
I have felt God's Spirit my whole life, and sometimes it would be something special, kind of a zap kind of thing. I can remember in school looking at an incomprehensible math problem and suddenly knowing how to do it. And another time, after my second husband died, I met Bill Long, who is a uncle to the Mullins that live over in Newark, and he always had some trouble in school, and he told me that when he was ready to graduate from high school, everyone on the block where he lived went together to make sure that he passed his English class. And at that moment I thought, there's something about this man. How many times do people do that, you know? And it was just sort of a, like, oh, this is a wonderful man. And I married him for 3 years. But the most amazing thing was I visited the temple out in Independence, and if you, it's a beautiful building, and as you go in, there's the chapel that is underneath that big spiral, and you look up and it just sort of pulls you up. And Lyndon Mountain, who used to live here in Columbus, happened to be giving the little program that they have. I think it's every noon or 11 o'clock, prayer for peace. And and I knew her, and I can't remember what was said, but I just felt such a peace there. So it was something I'd never experienced before. It was the most wonderful, wonderful thing. And if heaven is like that, then that's definitely where I want to end up. And those are just some things that have happened, but God's always with us. And these little things happen all the time, little things and big things.
Thank you.
I know a lot of you have heard this story before, but it was several years ago. my dad used to come up during the summer and work stay at our house through the week and work with my husband. And a lot of times on the weekends, we would follow him back down to their house and spend the weekend down there and see Mom and my sister and stuff. So it was one of those weekends. He had been at the house working through the week, and we were getting ready to follow him back down. We were going to follow him back down to Mom and Dad's. And he always took the kids in the car with him because they always wanted to ride with Papa because, you know, that was just special. They wanted to be with Papa. And it was strange at the time because I said, Dad, you know, you're going to take the kids. And he said, no, I'm not going to take the kids, and I'm going to go ahead and leave and go. And I'm like, well, if you just give us a few minutes to pack up, you know, just give us 5-10 minutes. He's like, no, I'm not going to wait for you. I'm leaving. And he left. And I was like, I looked at Mark and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. He didn't take the kids and he's not even waiting for us to follow him. That's just not like him. So I was like, oh, well, whatever, you know. So, so we leave about 10 minutes later. And as we're driving down, I'm like, surely to goodness we'll catch up with him eventually because Dad doesn't drive that fast. So, and Mark does. So I thought, well, we'll catch up with him eventually, you know. And we passed a van, and I was like, Mark, that looks like Dad pulled off the side of the road. So we turned around and went back, and sure enough, it was Dad. And come to find out, it was back when they had that highway shooter. And his car had been shot. The bullet had went through the window right behind the driver's seat, had went all the way through and lodged into the opposite side of the car. And Cameron would have been sitting right there in the back in the middle because that's where his car seat always goes. And that's where he would have been sitting right in that path line of that bullet. And I said, and after this, you know, Dad's told us, he said, that's why something was just telling me, don't take the kids and leave before them. Go and get out in front of them and don't take the kids. And thank goodness he listened to God telling him to go and get out, you know, distance in front of us so that nothing happened to us and the kids. And I'm just so grateful that he actually listened to that voice telling him, don't take the kids, because, I mean, you know, you would think, well, why not take the kids? You know, I always take the kids. But thank goodness he listened to God telling him, because who knows if Cameron would be here today or not.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Trying to say seated, give other people a chance to talk. You know that's not true. One of my experiences was a mountaintop experience. Just like Julia, I had gone my first time to Independence, where our auditorium and temple are, and there was a place inside that is called the Walk of the Disciple, or the Path of the Disciple. And I came to this church when it was meeting at Brook Park in 1995, and got baptized in 96, called to the office of a deacon in 97, and in 2000 was when I went to the auditorium and temple for the World Conference, first time and only time I've ever been there. But when I walked the path of the disciple, of course, I was raised in not a Pentecostal, but a very spiritual background. Holy rollers, we were called, ha ha. And but when I walked the path of the disciple, and when I walked in the shadow of the cross, I knew this is where I belonged. It was just, and it said, I was once lost, now I'm found, and it's like when I walked in the shadow of the cross and just on into the temple, it was just such an experience that God let me know, you guys are stuck with me.
This past summer began a kind of an experience that I'll speak a little bit about. I was at reunion, and Michelle came up to me, and now she's afraid I'm going to tell something I shouldn't. We know Michelle. We like to laugh with her, and she's a very serious person too, and I appreciate that very much. But we began a journey that kind of basically led to her baptism with her husband and with her 2 children. And it was really quite an amazing experience. But there was some listening to God along the way on my part. Somehow I kind of felt like a need to be a part of that service from the standpoint that to help them to come to a place that they felt good about and a time that they felt good about where they could go into the waters of baptism and then afterwards also be confirmed. And we worked together. One of the times that was especially important for me was it was the week before. Plans had been made finally, and I was in California. And at that point, everything seemed to be going just fine. But somehow I thought I still might be a part of that. Justin called me. And he said, well, he's sorry, a little bit late in calling. I remember you saying that, but, you said, would I be willing to give a charge, to them? And then that week kind of really went extra special for me. We did come home. We were a part of the service, but I then, by listening to the voice of God, realized that they had been brought to our community in a very, very special way. And I was able to speak some of those words, make them public, things that, stories that were there. And it was really, really a special time, not just as I hear you say, but also that it was special to you, but it was also very special to me as well. And I also recognize that the voice of God is speaking to others and making a connection with this church. I'm really excited about Amanda's confirmation and Joel's and Ashley's that's coming up here March 26th. By the way, that's my birthday. You don't have to bring anything, but okay. It turns out it's Ashley's birthday too, and I'm exactly 50 years older than her, okay? And you can imagine she's graduating, so how old that makes her and maybe makes me, but anyway. It'll be a special day, and I'm looking forward to that. But I see God continuing to lead persons to be this community because it's an important community for them in their journey in their spiritual life.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I feel like God's voice seems to get lost sometimes, and we feel like we might be alone, but then we get these nudges, right? These senses of, maybe I need to pull over if I see someone that looks like they might be in need, or what if I, call someone that maybe they just pop into your mind, right? And then it turns out to be a really powerful moment for that other person that they were thinking, that they needed. But God, He's always there, right? We just have a hard time sometimes finding Him or hearing it. I hope that we can follow the voice and the sense of comfort and love that God has intended for all of us. So, thank you.